I mean, I realize I'm not like that old, but there's a substantial difference between like 22.
How old are you?
I'm going to be 38 in January. So it doesn't seem that old, but when I would say you start feeling like substantial differences around 26 or 7.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Next year.
Yeah, that's when you start, like, things don't work as well. Like knees are a little bit off and stuff. Like, you used to feel young and it was just injury based. Now it's like even when you're not injured, things are creaking.
I already feel that way.
And stuff like that. And then you also feel less sharp. Like my mind, I would say when I got to about 33 maybe, I felt like my mind wasn't as fast. I mean, my mind's still very fast, but I have a very quick mind. So it's not as fast as it used to be. So I feel kind of dumb. I think it's probably more like what Larkin feels like on a daily basis, maybe.
Probably.
That's a compliment.
And then Blade at the second hackathon said that he was mad at me because I wasn't as fast as the first hackathon. It's like, I wrote an entire programming language in the first hackathon. It's a tough. I spent the second hackathon helping the other groups. Chinese people. All right. So let's kind of pick up where we left off last time. So the paper you wrote for today dealt with MVC differences between Android and iOS. Find out anything interesting there?
Android doesn't actually have MVC. It implements the basis of it, but then lets the developer implement it or not implement it as they decide.
Okay. I think it's a fair assessment, but realistically, most people would follow an MVC pattern because that's become kind of the norm. But I think it's fair of Android in general, is that they force you into less structured ways of doing things. There's usually 2 or 3 ways that are reasonable ways of pulling things off, where Apple they force you into their pattern because of the way their layout system works, and it's even I say worse and better now than it was before, because we'll talk about this some today. But in historically with Apple, here I'll say it, and then we'll see it, and then I'll say it again. So historically with Apple, what we had is you had a separate application called Interface Builder. So you had Xcode you'd launch, then you had Interface Builder that you'd launch, 2 separate programs. And Interface Builder, its entire job was about building interfaces, all right? Xcode, its entire job was about programming crap. So sometimes you'd flip over to Interface Builder, change something in your interface, save it, come back over here to Xcode, change something in your code, save it, then run it, and it would launch these things. So Interface Builder was really a program for manipulating an XML document. We talked about that a little bit last time. Okay. Well, then they integrated Interface Builder into Xcode. So now it's all one thing. So now we'd still have these things called zip files. We'd still have these things called zip files in Interface Builder. So you'd have, for every one of your interfaces, you'd have a separate file. So there was really 3 files associated with every screen on your application. You had the code behind file. Okay, you had the prototype file for the code behind file. So you had the .h file, the .m file, which is your Objective-C file. This is pre-Swift. Okay, then you'd have the zip file. So 3 separate files dealing with a single screen. All right. Now, with Swift, if we followed the Swift model, we'd have 2 files: the Swift file and the zip file. Now what we have is we have one document, the storyboard, that houses all of our zip files, all of the stuff that was in our zips. So now we really only have one screen, one code behind per screen in our application. Selectively, we can have more than that depending on how we want to create objects and that kind of stuff. But let's just say in the simple case, you have one code behind for each screen of your application, and then you have one storyboard that houses your entire interface. Okay, so what's MVC really stand for? Well, it's Model View Controller, but at the end of the day, it's what are best practices for having a user interface and having code that's behind it. We want to keep those things separate so we don't have interface and code all mixed together. yet we want to keep them interconnected to each other in such a way that it's convenient to move things between the two. Okay? So that's kind of the goal of it. Apple's approach is much more structured. They force you into that cadence of the Apple way of implementing the MVC. There's no other way of doing it, right? Your choice today is if you're going to use, your choice today for MVC on iPhone development or iOS development, whatever, is whether or not you use the drag and drop method to generate what are called IB outlets, or if you just type in the exact same code yourself instead of the drag and drop method. At the end of the day, the same code exists. Okay? Whether you typed it yourself or Apple typed it for you as a result of you dragging and dropping. There's one way to do it. Google kind of allows you flexibility for how you want to connect your code to your interfaces and that kind of stuff. All right. So what I want to do here, and we'll go ahead and do it with Xcode 7. So do I already have Xcode open here? I don't. I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to kind of go through the iOS way of handling, we'll say MVC. I'm actually going to do this with an iPhone app right now, just because of the way the storyboards work. Just so we can kind of see how MVC is implemented, and then we're going to come back around, whether it's today or next time, but we'll kind of look at an example of an Apple Watch app as well. They're all the same. So the skill set we're learning in here is going to be identical whether you're doing iPhone applications, iPod Touch applications, iPad applications, Apple Watch applications, or now Apple TV applications. The only difference is the screen sizes on those devices and maybe which widgets are allowed. So obviously Apple Watch, we have to solve our problems in terms of the widgets that are allowed on the Apple Watch screen, right? So certain things don't make sense on the Apple Watch screen, other things do. We probably have more widgets that will make sense on a bigger screen like this that won't make sense on a tiny screen like this. And it'll be interesting with the new Apple TV. So I have to grab Xcode 7.1 beta, which has the Apple TV development stuff on it. And my new Apple TV came today, apparently. Gracie signed for it. Not even kidding. What does that say right there?
No jury duty.
No, that's the bottom. The pictures.
Oh, cat package Apple TV.
See, Gracie signed for my Apple TV. Yeah, and then Gracie also does not have jury duty on Monday. It's good. Oh, by the way, remind me after class to tell you the other story. Meant to do it before the recording started, and now we'll have to do it after the recording stops. It's not that bad, but it was, what the heck. So I finally got my car back after 7 weeks in the shop. So I go in there last night, and so I've gotten all sorts of different stories as to why it's taken so long. And here, let me just get this loading at least. So why it's taken so long. And one of the things I got was that, just do single view application, was that, we had a fight with the insurance company. We needed more money. Another one was that parts were back ordered for a decade. Another one was that the person who was assigned to my car had to take an emergency leave or something like that. So my car just sat there, I guess. So anyways, I come in, and it's all like the left and right hand aren't talking to each other. So I come in, the body shop guy had emailed me, said, okay, it's all ready to go. We worked everything out with the insurance company. Everything's good. You just have to come in, pick it up, sign this document, and they'll release the car to you. So I show up, and they say, okay, well, we need you to give us $7,500. So that's the other half or not other half. It's like the other, I guess, 65% of when they opened it all up, there was more damage than they thought or something. I don't know. So it was like $13,000 of damage. So I'm like, well, I don't understand. My insurance company is supposed to cut you a check for that, and everybody said everything's good. I have a note here from the insurance company. It says the check's in the mail. This guy, your dude from the body shop says I just have to sign this form. It's like, oh yeah, it's all going to be fine, but so you just have to give us the money now, and then we'll credit it back once we get the check. So the funny thing is I don't know if you saw on Facebook that my cat's on dose 7 of her antibiotics now. Still has a little bit of an infection with her butt. So the guy said, "You have to give me the $7,500." I said, "Unfortunately, that money's earmarked for cat ass." So then he started laughing, and then he gave me my keys and said we would just figure it out.
Make a guy laugh. Doesn't cost you $7,500.
The funny thing is, I'm not even going to pay the deductible. I mean, because they took them 7 weeks to fix it. I mean, there's also their competitors, all sorts of like Bob's, body shop. They'll say we'll pay your deductible up to $500. They just discount the work, right?
Yeah, they just take it off. They
Yeah.
just find ways in the work.
Well, I took it to the dealership thinking that it would get done quicker. 7 weeks isn't quick. I feel confident I could have dropped it off with Bob's Body Shop and gotten it done in 7 weeks. So it'll all work out. At least they gave me a good rental, like a good
Loan.
that could pull my boat and stuff. But yeah, that was pretty funny. He laughed pretty hard actually at that. Yeah, so I've been on kind of the warpath for like the last 24 hours. It's been
Need a hug?
no, I'm good. I'm actually in a reasonable mood. Just just crushing it. Okay. So in any case, just to kind of pull this back together, since move us away from pus coming out of a cat's butt. All right. So as I mentioned before, we have this one thing here called the storyboard. Okay. So I'm going to click on the storyboard here, and let me go ahead and I'm going to give us some space here. This over. Actually, I need to make that. That's the only way it works now? Oh, no, this. Whatever. Okay. So this is the view for our storyboard. Now I'm going to go ahead and slide this back in. And we're going to click on a single view controller. All right. So we want to give some definition to some of these different things. View controllers exist whether we're dealing with iPhone, Apple Watch, Apple TV, whatever. We have these things called view controllers. And I've mentioned it here, but let's kind of give some definition to it. Okay, so we have this dude called a view controller. And a view controller, as its name implies, controls crap that goes on with a view. That's what a view controller is. Controls views. All right. Now, what's a view? A view is anything we see on the screen. So everything that we see on the screen behind the scenes is at some level represented as a view. So for instance, labels. Yes, they're of type UI label, but in the hierarchy model, the inheritance model, the top of the list, they're a view. All right, so if we see it, it's a view. Anything we see is typically going to start with a heading called UI. So it's UI, view, UI, label, so on and so forth. Okay, so things we see are UI stuff. Things that do stuff behind the scenes are going to be NS stuff. NS stuff. So let's just do another slide for this. NS stuff. These are things that we can't see, but have uses anyway. All right. So as an example, NS string. Okay. NS strings. These are things things we don't actually see on the screen, but certainly representing strings behind the screen and behind the scene are going to be pretty important, right? Okay. Now the interesting thing for us is NS stands for next step. And what's next step? That was Steve Jobs' company that he built after he was fired from Apple. Next Computers was created by Steve Jobs after he was fired from Apple. Apple then acquired Next Computers, which came with Steve Jobs, who was in and put in as interim CEO the iCEO. And we see today that the stuff, when they acquired Next Computers, most of what Apple is today from a software perspective is what came from that acquisition. So it's really Apple's logo on Next Computers, if you look at what we have today in terms of Apple, the company. All right, and we see that even at the software level. All right, so, but punchline here for us is we have things that we see are views of some kind. All right, and a view controller's job is to maintain control of view. And we can actually say that this guy's job is to control a hierarchy of views. And what we mean by that is, if we go back to view here, we say the view is actually a container. Okay? Views can hold other views. And those views can hold other views. And those views can hold other views, so on and so forth. So we can have a whole collection of views. So when we think about a screen in our application, we have this idea of a view controller, so something that looks like that. And then we have this idea of a view that lives in that view controller, so a top level view. Okay, so this is the view is what we see. The view controller is the code behind the MVC aspect of this that deals with stuff occurring within that view. All right, now a view is a container, so a view can actually hold other views. So we can have a view here that maybe has a label up top. Maybe this label just says Mike. We can have another view on here. Okay, maybe this has a picture of my cat's butt. So that's going to be a UI image. Actually, a UI image view, which holds a UI image. So that kind of stuff. But both of these subviews live within its parent view container. And this parent view container is what's actually managed by this view controller. Okay? So every single view controller controls exactly one view, where a view is a hierarchy of at least one view. Okay? Because so it's one or more views. Not every view has a view controller.
So you would not want to do that. Like you would not want to have separate view controllers for picture or the.
That's not true. You wouldn't always want to do that. So I would say the default move would be this. If you had a single screen on your application, so usually we want to think of screens as being represented by view controllers. If we had a single screen in our application and this screen had a label on it like this, and this label was just was going to say Mike, we probably would not want to control that by an entire view controller. Okay? Instead, what we want to do is we want to get access to this UI view, this label, from within our view controller. And we do that through something called an IB outlet. We'd want to give ourselves programmatic access to this widget on the interface. But we wouldn't actually have it. He wouldn't actually have his own view controller that controls him. Instead, we would dual purpose the view controller associated with this outer one, who handles all the touch events and stuff like that that occurs in this view, but also knows how to write stuff to this label. Something like that. Okay? Now, the alternative to that is, let's say that this guy down here is a scrolling thing of sports scores. Okay, constantly updating or something like that. Well, we might decide, you know what? Sure, we could control that guy by, writing a whole bunch of logic into this view controller. Or what we can actually do is we can have a second view controller. Okay, and maybe this view controller is actually the code behind for this view. So instead of this view having a programmatic link into this view controller, It's actually the one view maintained by this view controller. That makes sense? So maybe this guy's called scores VC, something like that. All right, so this is our scores VC, VC for view controller, and his view that he manages is this view, and this view has been added as a subview to this view. But he's actually controlled by this view controller. All right, so punchline to your question is, it's not, we don't always want to have a view controller for every view. But a view controller a view controller always has at least one view, but not every view has a view controller. I think that's right. Not every view has a...
View controllers can't have two views?
No, view controller only controls one view, which is actually a hierarchy of views. So you could have 1,000 views technically in a view controller, but the view controller only has one primary view, one guy that he's associated with. And then that view might have subviews within it. All right, so let's kind of see this here. So I'm going to just change the size of this real quick, just so it's, let's make it an iPhone 4 size. So it fits on the screen a little bit better for us. Okay, so by default, when you first start an application, we get a view controller. It came with it. Okay, and you notice over here on the left, it's also given us the code behind for that guy called viewcontroller.swift. So this is, we just started an application. This is the crap that came with it, stuff. All right, but I'm going to go back into the storyboard here. When I click on this view controller, we have a whole bunch of stuff up here. And one of these things, this guy right here, is the attribute inspector. This shows us the individual attributes associated with this view controller, not the view that's in it. I've clicked on this yellow guy right here. This is the actual view controller, because this whole thing right here, this whole animal right there, is actually of class view controller. Okay, so when I click on this guy, okay, this is the identity inspector. What's the identity of this view controller? The identity of whatever I have selected. That's probably the better way of putting it. So this guy is of class view controller, which is this guy right here. Okay, and this guy right here, view controller, is actually a UI view controller, which is something that we would see. Make sense? All right, so go back here. So this is the stuff. Did it really go back? Oh, I clicked it. Nice. Go back to iPhone 4. All right. So still selected on the view controller. I'm going to click on, well, this is the measurements for it, but these, I have it set for, instead of setting the size myself here, I use the simulated metrics here to say, just make this iPhone 4 size. Not that important for us right now. We'll work with the sizing of things and all that stuff later. Okay, but what we are interested in right now is I haven't written anything special. This is just the crap that came with the code. Here's the view controller. This is the code behind in this MVC pattern, and so this is all this guy does right now. He's called a view controller. He has a function called viewDidLoad, whatever that means. We'll talk about that. And then he has another function called didReceiveMemoryWarning. Both of which do nothing. Okay, so right now, this guy is just an empty husk. Make sense? All right, so go back to our storyboard. Now, when I click on this last part here, which is the outlet inspector, connections inspector, I guess, we see that we have this section called outlets. And we already have one in here called view. So all view controllers come with a built-in outlet called view. Make sense? That is the one view that view controller controls.
But you can't change it.
You can. You can change it. Let's see. I think I actually will have to do something different here, though. Can I disconnect it there? I think maybe I have to do that. Let's see here. Do it if it's inferred, maybe. Short answer is yes, you can, but I have to somehow unlock it. So assume the answer is yes, you definitely can, but for right now, let's just leave it. right, so go back to 4-inch. All right, so anyways, we see that there's already an outlet here for view that we didn't have to create. Okay, similarly, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to drag on. So over here we have a whole bunch. We have media that's in our application right now. We have no pictures and stuff. We've driven into the app or drug into the app. But here's our object library. This is all the stuff, the widgets that belong in a iPhone, that are allowed in an iPhone application. If we were doing an Apple Watch application, we'd have less stuff, but still stuff. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab a label. We're just going to drag this label right here. Okay, so we'll just leave it there. I'm going to go ahead and run this application. Okay, just as is, and this is going to launch. Notice up here, it's what simulator you wanted to use. So I'll go ahead and just launch the 4S simulator because that's the size. I made it, it'll launch more quickly. All right, so we'll go ahead and launch that. And it'll also fit on the screen a little better as well. So here's the simulator. It's going to launch this application. There's our label. Okay, running iPhone application. If we were doing this for Apple Watch, it would have been very, very similar. Just wanted to have a bigger canvas. Okay, now I can change what this label says. Run it again, and now it'll say Mike on it instead of hello, or instead of label, right? So there's Mike. Now, if I want to programmatically change it, I need to, and this is our MVC pattern, okay? So what we see here is everything that's visual. What we have here in viewcontroller.swift is the code behind for that interface. And how do we know it's the code behind for that interface? Because if we go into our storyboard and we click on this view controller and we click on its identity, we see that the class that it's associated with is the one called view controller, which is this guy right here. So that's what married these two guys together. Make sense? All right. So what I'm going to do here, we're going to do the drag and drop way because that's the new cool kid way of doing things. So I'm going to click on this view controller thing here. And then there's a button up here. And this guy is called the assistant editor. And when I click that, and things, because this is squeezed down my resolution, this is going to look funky probably. But I'm going to do that, and it's going to put the code right next to it. So I'm going to give myself some space here. Just so we can see it. All right, so how do I make this? I want this skinnier. Whatever. All right, so in any case, I want to give myself programmatic access to this label. So I need to have access to doing things with this label inside of this view controller. Make sense? So I need to pull that off somehow. And I mentioned a little bit ago, we can either just write the code ourselves, or we can use the new cool kid drag and drop thingamajig. So what we're going to do is we're going to just highlight the label. I'm going to press Control, click, and I'm going to drag over to this window. So you need to be inside the class, but not inside of a function. So I'm inside the class. I'll let go of it. And I have a choice to add two separate things. I can either add an outlet, or I can add, actually, the other thing would be an action, but actions don't exist with labels. A button would either have an outlet or an action. What happens when we click the button, for example? Okay? Or I want to have access to the button so I can change the text that it says. That kind of stuff. So in this case, I want to have an outlet, giving myself programmatic access to the widget that is this label. Okay? And we're going to call this guy name label. And his type is UI label. That's what he is. Okay? The rest of it is just a wizard for me. Question?
I was going to ask what the storage was, the weak.
What the? So weak versus strong, this is how the pointers for it work. So if it's a weak one, it actually is it'll be a pointer to that object. If it's strong, that means it's actually going to be passed around as a copy. So weak is 99% of the time what we want. All right. So we'll go ahead and we'll just connect this. And that's going to insert some code over here. All right. Now, based on what we've talked about so far today, what do you think the IB stands for here? This kind of goes along with my pattern of being able to understand how the past has influenced where we came today. What's the tool that I said we originally used for creating interfaces for iPhone? Interface Builder. Okay, we've been using IB outlets since day one of iOS development. The tool that we've used to work with them has changed a little bit, but there's our evidence. It's all the same crap. Okay, so this created a specialty kind of variable for me. So let me go ahead and just exit out of this and go back into our, these are helpful little things if you're on smaller screens, but my code lives on that one, the one that's the far left up here. So you can toggle that on and off to give you screen real estate if you need it. The interface builder stuff lives over here. And then this is your console before we do anything with the console.
Is that default or did you set that?
It's default. Yeah, this is stock. Yeah, I literally haven't, this is just the 7.0 Gold Master Beta. I haven't touched it other than double clicking it. All right, so I'm going to go into my view controller. And now we notice that here it's indeed put that code in there. It's that little curly Q guy up there. I don't know, what's it called? The assistant editor, I think. That guy, the assistant editor, brought up the right code. But one thing that you'll find helpful to make sure it gets you to the right class is always click the view controller thing here. That way it's associated it with the correct code behind. Then you click the assistant editor, which will bring up the right thing. Okay? That way you can do your drag and drag stuff. All right, so go back into the view controller. And now what we're going to do is we're just going to update that label in here. So I have a variable named name label. So we've created variables already, right? So this is our Swift language. This is our first time creating a variable of type UI label. Okay, but nonetheless, we get a variable of type UI label. His name is name label. This weak thing, don't worry about it right now. And this guy is a specialty type of variable. He's an IB outlet, which means he is our way of linking to a widget that lives in our interface. Okay, so this has provided us programmatic access to that label. So inside here, go ahead.
Can you type that in as well, or do you have to?
You could type this exact line if you want. Yeah, no harm, no foul. Yeah, all this is syntactic sugar. It lets you drag and drop instead of typing it. Okay. Yeah, so really what you're asking is, did anything special occur other than this? And the answer is no. It's a slight lie. Let me show you what else it did. I'm going to just copy that code, and we're going to call this guy name label 2. It's as if I wrote a second one myself. Okay? So now I have 2 separate variables here called name label. Well, one name label 2. If I go into my storyboard, I click on my view controller, and I go to my outlets here, you'll see that there's now an unlinked up outlet for name label 2. So what I can do is I can take that and I can drag it here and connect it this direction. All right, so really that drag and drop thing did both pieces. Wrote the code and actually hooked up the outlet for me. And that is important if you write your own stuff like this, that you recognize that, because sometimes you'll wonder why like a button isn't working or something, and it's because you forgot to hook it up. So the code behind's written, the button exists, but the button is nowhere linked to the code behind. Those things aren't connected. Have a question? I covered it, the awesomeness. Okay. So what we'll do here, and right now we have 2 separate variables that both point to the same place. Make sense? All right, so let's go back into our code here. So I'm going to go ahead and inside of viewDidLoad, which we'll talk about here in a minute, let's just, for right now, well, I'll just say it. ViewDidLoad is the very, very, very first function that will ever get called when a view controller comes into existence. So we have a whole bunch of, we have this idea called the view controller lifecycle. Okay, so we have something called the view controller lifecycle. So for instance, we have viewDidLoad, we have viewWillAppear, we have view, I spelled that wrong, whatever, viewDidAppear, viewWillDisappear, viewDidDisappear, those types of things. So these are various events that automatically get called when the view is in different states. So when a view first is created, view did load gets called. When view will appear, when it's just about to actually show up on the screen, view will appear gets called. Okay? When view did appear gets called is when the view actually is on the screen. And we're going to kind of see this here in a second. We'll see if we can simulate it.
So you mean like we could put our own code in there? So
Yeah, it's our opportunity to interact with a view at different points in time. Okay, if we want something to happen in view did load gets called one time ever when the view is first born. Okay, so that's when view did load gets called. View will appear gets called every single time that view is about to appear on the screen, which makes sense if you have the view appear once and you have a button that goes to another screen, then you go back to this screen, that view appeared twice. First time it came onto the screen, then when it left the screen, it did and will disappear. Okay, and then when it came back, it will and did appear. So two separate entry points coming back. So it gives us the opportunity to do things. And what's the difference between will appear and did appear? Well, do you want it to happen before it even shows up on the screen, but just right before? Or do you want it to happen after it's shown up on the screen so that the people can actually maybe see it happen? Maybe you have a little animation you want to occur, and you don't want your animation to start while the screen's not there. But once the screen is there, maybe you want to have a little something happen, and you don't want that timer to start for the animation until after the user can actually see it. All right, but for our intents and purposes now, this is our first opportunity to make something happen related to our view. And this is actually important because depending on how, and I'll mention this again when we get into a situation, but let me just academically tell you it now. There are times before this where you might think you have access to widgets that are on the screen. So for instance, our UI label here, okay? So for instance, let's say that it's possible that we could have a constructor that we wrote in here. And that constructor takes in the name we want to put on that label. And technically, let's say that constructor actually gets called before the view is actually born, because this is what gets called when the view is actually born. If you try to set the label in there, it will not work. All right? And I'll at some point we'll demonstrate this. This is a very common thing.
Error it won't work, or it just won't show up?
It just won't show up. And it's because this widget doesn't exist yet. That widget is not born until right here. The variable exists, so you're writing to something real, but the widget's not actually there, so you have nothing to fill in.
So, but if I have it set, if I have that set to whatever the variable is, wouldn't it still do it because that's what the variable is?
No. So for instance, let's work backwards here. So let's say that I have, so I'm going to say name label. Actually, usually I'll do something like this. I'll say self dot name label so I don't mess up the spelling. And I'm going to say dot text is equal to Mike. Okay. With that, I'm actually let's make it Bob. Do I already have it set to Mike maybe? Okay. So I'll set it equal to Bob. That is actually accessing a specific attribute of that name label. So if we go back out here to the storyboard and I click on the label and we go underneath its attributes here, we see that it has a text attribute that's currently hard-coded to Mike. I'm changing that attribute to Bob programmatically. Okay, so if this label doesn't exist yet, it's a chicken or the egg problem. I have a variable that will point to that label, but doesn't currently point to that label because there is no label. Okay, like the whole there is no spoon thing in the matrix, blah, blah, blah. Okay. All right, so now, even though I've hard-coded it to Mike in my storyboard, okay, so that's its default value, if you will, in our view controller, when the view did load, I'm changing it to Bob. So now when I run this, it should be Bob right off the bat because it changed to Bob when the label first came into existence, but well before it actually showed up on the screen. All right, so we'll go ahead and run this. So now it's Bob. And no matter how quick your eyes were, I promise you it was Bob by the time you saw it. All right, but now let's insert it a different place. So we're going to say, I'm going to create another function here. We're going to say override. And the function we're going to override, we're going to func view did appear. All right, and we'll look at the documentation and see where all these things come from, but for right now, just trust me, this exists. All right, so view did appear, and inside here, I'm going to set the text to Bob instead of in view did load. Okay, so exact same thing, we're doing the exact same thing, but we're doing it in a different place. Okay, now if we look really carefully, and the refresh rate works out okay, because this is a really fast process, technically, we might be able to see the change. We might not, but we might be able to. Certain things we'd definitely be able to see. If I put something in here that had like connected to the internet and then came back, we'd see the delay. But this is a pretty straightforward little thing. We're not doing a whole bunch, so pay really close attention. All right, I'm gonna here, hold on. Let's well, whatever. Just trust me. Trust me. It actually, could I do this? Can I say I'm just gonna try to put it to sleep for a second. Oh, it's bad code already. Varval is into int. This is var.
Java.
And then in here, we're going to say val is equal to, oh, this wants it to be, no, val is equal to I times I, whatever. Good. Not going to happen enough times. And here we'll just do a print I, or print val rather at the end. All right. All right. So I'm trying to artificially insert a delay here just for right now. So hopefully we'll get to see it flicker from Mike to Bob. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play there.
I saw Mike up there.
And why did I get a bad instruction? Oh, it probably got too big. Let's just set it to I. That'll probably give us enough of a delay. Did we see it? We didn't see it.
I saw something.
There was something. All right, there's something. Trust me. Trust me, there's something. All right, so lastly, just to kind of see where we're going here, let me go back here to our storyboard. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create another view controller. So I'm going to drag another view controller out of here. And this guy's not going to have a code behind. So we're going to just show you how easy it is to create full interfaces. So we'll call this guy view 2. Here, we'll just throw a button on him. It's good enough. And then what I'll do is I'm going to throw another button back here. And I'm going to click there and hit click control, drag, and say show. And now I have a app that has a button that goes to another screen.
So much longer.
All right, so you have to programmatically do that in Android. So you can build a 20-page application pretty easily, and but then you have to go and generate the code behinds for each one. And we'll start doing that next week. All right, so I will very, very likely give you a quiz over something we discussed today on Monday. So I won't give you a homework assignment over the weekend, but make sure you review this material or whatever, and that way we can make the people who skip suffer twice. Okay? All right, have a good weekend, and make sure you wish Katie Knudsen a happy birthday. You should sing to her as well.
What's her birthday actually?
Yesterday. It's yesterday.
Okay, I was